What's going on, everybody? My name is Stephen Hyder. My co-host to the right is Hunter Doyle. Together, we form the Analytically Incorrect podcast, well, football podcast, to be exact. And we're going to give you some very much incorrect analytics today, so you're in for a treat. We are talking day one and day two valuations at the skill position. Mostly it's going to focus on wide receivers, but we are going to expand upon it to talk about just building the offense around Jalen Hurts and what you do there. Like who are the day one and the day two selections that could give you some kind of a, bang for your buck here to make this offense a little bit more potent. Now, I will admit, guys, we're talking offensive line in this one. That'll be a separate podcast. Today, we're just talking about rounds 1, rounds 2, rounds 3. Who are the playmakers at wide receiver, running back, and tight end that can put pieces around Jalen Hurts to expand upon the offense. So with that said, guys, what's up, Hunter? How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Coach Steve. I'm really excited. This is we'll talk about it in depth, but an exciting wide receiver class. Maybe not as top heavy as last year, but I think there's a lot of names that we can talk about in this one.
So why don't we start off? I'll give a list of the guys I'm considering day one and day two picks. And I don't think all these guys are day one or day two picks, but I think these are the grouping of guys that are in consideration. And then we have to probably talk about how we maybe add a guy, maybe I left somebody off, or do we detract? How do we detract from this list? Because we're probably talking about roughly 97 to 100 picks in day one and day two. So let's start off with just kind of who the names are. I got Drake London, Sky Moore, Treylon Burks, Jahan Dotson, David Bell, Jalen Tolbert, Jameson Williams, Garrett Wilson, Romeo Doubs, Chris Olave, John Mechie III, Alex Pierce, Justin Ross, George Pickens, Khalil Shakir, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Christian Watson. Together, that's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 17 names. 17 names. We've got 100 picks. Roughly. So we're talking about 17% of those picks would be just at wide receiver. We haven't even talked about running backs or tight ends. We'll get to that in a second. Let me just ask you, from that list, who do you think are the kind of the borderline guys?
For day 2, day 3, kind of? Or
day 2. Day 2.
Yeah. So just to clarify, as far as day 1, day 2?
You got it.
Gotcha. Okay, I lost connection there for a second. My bad. But yeah, as far as borderline, I would honestly go as far to say I think Sky Moore is I think he's going to rise up a little bit. I know he's kind of more of a slot guy, but I could totally kind of see him as a borderline guy, like early day 2 pick. As far as other guys go, I'm kind of looking at probably Dotson. I think there's going to be a lot of hype around him just because, I think Penn State's kind of had their share of wide receivers come out of there. He's kind of a flashy playmaker. I have a feeling one team kind of might fall in love with him and he might rise up a little bit. And yeah, I think David Bell is definitely a borderline guy. Like we talked about him a little bit before the podcast. I'm a big David Bell fan. I would honestly go as far as to say, he's also an early. I would probably pick him early day 2 as well. I wouldn't be opposed to a team picking him late day 1 either. Probably later day 1. But those are kind of three of the guys I'm thinking of. We talked a little bit about Christian Watson, Wan'Dale Robinson. I think those are 2 guys that are going to kind of be around day 2. But I think Watson's starting to rise up for sure. As you saw him Senior Bowl, he really started to get some recognition there. And Wan'Dale, I believe it was his bowl game that he played. Unbelievable last drive to kind of just really solidify, look, I'm a top prospect this year and put everyone on notice. So I think he's going to rise up a little bit. But the first 3 guys I mentioned are probably more so borderline.
I'll get into I'm going to talk first round. I got 4 locks. I'm not saying they're the only guys that will get drafted first round, but I think these are what I would call the locks of the first round. So to begin with, I'm just going to be honest with everybody, guys. I have Drake London as my number 1 wide receiver from this class. When I looked at the film, I looked at the underlying analytics. There was just so much to love about Drake London's game that he was probably second on my list, maybe even third, to be honest, going in. Coming away, I just, this guy does every little thing correctly. The only concern I have here is he has a very similar injury, if I'm not mistaken, to DJ Shark. Is that correct?
I can't confirm that for you, unfortunately. But
I think he injured the ankle. I'm not too sure if he broke it or if there's a ligament damage, but I think it pertained to one of his ankles. But this is just basically the notes I have on this.
Season-ending broken ankle. Yeah.
Oof. Big outside wide receiver, man. Traditionally, you would look at him as an X-line boundary side receiver inside of the NFL. I will say that his production was outstanding versus Pac-12 cornerbacks. To be fair, we're talking Pac-12 cornerbacks, which it can be misleading. But with that said, he accumulated more than 50 yards receiving in every single game. And he had over 150 yards receiving in 4 games. It's incredible production. The last time he was held to under 50 yards receiving in a game was back in November of 2020 versus Utah. Very good defense out that way. He only has 3 total collegiate games in his entire collegiate career where he was held under 50 yards receiving, and 2 of those were in his freshman year. His yards per route run last season was 3.52. Very, very productive guy. Crazy large frame. He uses that large frame very well on contested catches, 19 of 28. He's a really good route runner. He's graded very highly as a route runner. And this guy absolutely destroyed man coverage. They just could not stop him on man coverage. Now, I will say, despite the dominant narrative of him being a 7, 8, and 9 route tree guy, so vertical route concepts, he was barely inside the top 200 in terms of targets over 20 yards. So that's a little bit of a misnomer of what he actually does. There's a lot more to his game than just being a vertical stretch guy. I absolutely fell in love with what this guy was on the film. Who is your number 1 wide receiver in this draft class?
Yeah, so I'm still very, very high on Treylon Burks. You know how I feel about him. We'll get into him a little bit. I just love the dynamic playmaking ability that he brings. And I think like you mentioned, I think when you kind of I would even, first off, want to give you credit too. You said it on the last podcast. The USC wideouts, I mean, you talk about the Pac-12, those guys have been some of the more consistent prospects to come out in recent years. So even though he is playing the competition there, I think it's still worth noting it's USC. But as far as Burks goes, he is facing a lot of tough competition down there. And yeah, I think with Arkansas's offensive structure, like, again, kind of uses that motion man, a slot guy a lot of the time. And I think he can do more than that. I talked about him. I've compared him to Deebo Samuel, but we talked about Michael Thomas on the last podcast. He brings a little bit of that to his game too. Probably needs to get a little bit better in that regard, but I think the straight line speed is there. Obviously, the size is kind of there, like London, in terms of height, especially. And I think you can still incorporate what Arkansas did while also having him kind of be, an X or just kind of one of your outside guys, or you can put him as a tall slot too. I think there's a lot of versatility you get there with Treylon Burks, and you plug him into your offense, I think he's going to make some type of impact in year 1. So I'm still very high on Treylon. I'm very high on Drake London too. I think they're both going to be phenomenal prospects. So I'm gonna stick with my guy Treylon.
What I love is and this is my top 4 guys, and you can tell me if you differ a little bit, but Drake London, obviously, I said he was my number 1 receiver. Treylon Burks, definitely my top 4 guys here. Jameson Williams and Garrett Wilson are the top 4 guys I have in terms of their rankings and where they're going to go. I think all 4 of those dudes are first-round picks. What I love about the first round is all 4 of these guys are so different from one another. They're not the same type of players. None of them are. I do think that Treylon Burks would be the guy that when you put him out there on the combine, there's going to be a lot of oohs and ahs because he's going to test well.
Yes.
The guy is built like a Grecian god. I mean, this dude's a Greek god if I've ever seen one. He's going to test well. Yak, yards after the catch, and what he can do, he's special at it. I'll say that I look at Jameson Williams, and I see a dude that just absolutely can fly. Jameson Williams has that crazy, like production if you look at yards per like route run and what he can do, man. I mean, 3.12, very productive guy. His average depth of target was like 14.5 yards. And then you look at his like receiving versus, man coverage. That's the one area of his game where I think he's got to get a little better. He's got to get a little better at beating man coverage. But if you look at the underlying athleticism, this dude made quarterbacks look a lot better. So you look at passer rating when targeted, 143. Only Treylon Burks with his 155.3, almost a perfect rating, made quarterbacks look better. But, I mean, this guy was just a deep threat, passes over 20 yards. He was killing guys. I mean, he's such a crazy prospect. He's so different from everyone else. He was ranked second in terms of passes over 20 yards. He had 32 attempts, 13 receptions. He's just a home run hitter. He's a home run hitter who's a better route runner than people think. When I look at the last option here, this is the guy I think is a little more difficult to break down, which is Garrett Wilson. Really, really good route runner. This is the young man that if you need the inside breaking routes, he's your dude. I'm talking about, dig routes and slant routes and hitches and curls and comebacks. Like, I think Garrett Wilson is very good at that. I think he can work the middle of the field for you. Depending on the style of what your offense is, this is a guy that you could definitely play in the slot if you wanted to. But, he's not a big dude. He's not a big, kind of like wingspan guy. I think he's a good enough route runner, Garrett Wilson, to beat man coverage even in a press situation, even on the boundary side of the field. I just think that all four of these guys are so different from one another that they offer you a whole lot in terms of like what they are. It's definitely like pick your flavor of receiver this year, because I feel like this receiving class in particular has every flavor of receiver. Now I'll ask you, does your top four different? Do you have maybe like an Olave above like a Williams, or you basically have the same exact top four?
No, I have the same top four. I think, look, Williams, he's so twitchy. His change of direction is nuts. His hips are pretty insane. Like, the way he's able to go out there and just sink his hips at the top of the route it's next level. It's next level. That guy, you get the ball in his hand. He really does remind me a lot of when Devontae Smith came out last year. It's very similar. Obviously, they differ a little bit. Jameson's a little bit bigger, but very similar play style. And he can go up and get the ball a little bit too. Like, people will knock his frame probably in terms of contested catchability, but I think that he's shown it at times. Not saying he's a Drake London. Speaking of Drake London, yeah, that guy. I think the one thing people probably knock about Drake London is speed. I'm really not concerned about that when he does what he does, and also when he's able to get enough separation at the top of the route to where he can get the ball. Like, I'm not worried about him going out there and running a 9 route and not being able to win on it. I'm not. He's going to be able to get just enough separation to where he's going to be able to grab it over the shoulder or make a contested catch if it's underthrown. He did have 8 drops, but, I think looking at the film, some of those are probably accounted to some tough contested catch situations where maybe it did hit him in the hands, but still tough to bring down. He led the country in contested catches. So I really don't have too many questions about his hands. Like, that's not something I'm worried about. And the intermediate inner breaking routes, I think, is something he's really going to excel at too, or continue to excel at in the NFL. Yeah. And as far as Wilson goes, definitely kind of your RPO, like, you kind of want him as, I think you want him as the bubble guy for sure out there. Get the ball into his hands behind the line of scrimmage and let him go to work. Stuff like that underneath.
Yeah, he would be so interesting. And this is not a boundary side X, not your prototypical traditional guy. But man, teaming Garrett Wilson with Devontae Smith with a speed guy like you have in Quez Watkins, that would be an interesting offensive combination, because those two guys in particular, Garrett Wilson and Devontae Smith, are such good route runners. They just understand leverage and how to gain it on a defender. They're both very good against man coverage. Now, I will say, Garrett Wilson is not the phenomenal freak that we saw in terms of beating man coverage the way that we saw Devontae Smith do it. Devontae Smith was just 96 grading coming out of college. I mean, that guy was phenomenal versus man coverage. But Garrett Wilson is pretty good, man. I don't think any of these guys are going to have tremendous struggles translating to the NFL. I don't. And here's what I want to propose to people. I think skill position is becoming very important in the NFL. Here's my sales pitch. We need corners. We do. Absolutely. But I think it's a heck of a lot harder to be productive as a rookie as a corner than it is as a receiver. So when you're talking first round evaluations, I think this is where you make your sales pitch of like, you're probably going to get a lot more production out of a wide receiver if you get it right than you are as a corner if you get it right. Because I think corner, there's just a lot to adapt to at the NFL level. And I don't think that, you get a lot of guys that just aren't quite right. I mean, look at A.J. Terrell, incredible cornerback this year. Probably, let's be honest, he's probably the best cornerback in the league last year. But with that said, it took him a year to get his feet under him to really kind of adjust to the game. I think that's the argument you make. And I'm not saying the Eagles are going to do one thing or the other. I mean, I don't know at the end of the day, but that would be the argument I would make is like, if I get the right guy here at wide receiver, I'm probably going to get far more out of him in the rookie year than I am a cornerback. what do you think here, man? If you're the Eagles and you got 15, 16, and 19, who's the guy that might make you move off and say, you know what, I'm making this pick?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, first off, me and my buddy Sanjay always talk about like rookie corners. There's always an adjustment period in there. I mean, even like you're not going to always get lucky and have a guy like Jair Alexander or Marshall Lattimore who just come in and just make an impact right away. And even those guys, like they had to get their feet under them and fix some things up. As far as guys, I would be like, yes, like they're on the board. Let's go out and grab them. Drake London, Treylon Burks. I think those two guys. I think, those are really like the two guys that if they're on the board, I think I'm taking one of them. As far as like Williams and Williams and Wilson, I'm okay with either of those guys. I think they're tremendous talents. But I just think, I don't think like you have to limit it to team need in terms of the boundary X, but I just really do like what London and Burks bring in that regard and how they would kind of fit alongside. But that doesn't mean I don't think Williams or Wilson wouldn't fit. I think they would absolutely be an upgrade over the wide receiver 3 we have right now. And there's always ways you can get guys like that involved no matter what.
So I want to talk back into the first round all the way into the second round. So mostly we're talking day 2 prospects with the idea that some of these guys might jump up. I mean, it's always possible a guy jumps up. I have a few people in mind that I think of this valuation. I say to myself, like, okay, these guys make sense in this round evaluation of where they'll probably be drafted. And to me, I think the biggest name to watch here would be Chris Olave, because I think he's the next kind of guy up in most people's mocks. I will say that Olave concerns me with beating man coverage. He did not do well in college versus man coverage, but this is a guy that can get vertical on you. He can get deep. Outside of, maybe running against man press and learning how to beat man press, he's not Jahan Dotson level concern against man press, but he's got some growth that has to happen there. But I'll say outside of him, Sky Moore's another dude that, man, you run the film and boy, there's a couple of guys that come to mind with him, Sky Moore to me. Going back a little ways, Emmanuel Sanders in terms of the outside-inside versatility. He's got Emmanuel Sanders written all over him to me. And then you can say Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore last year with the Jets. I can see those kind of – they definitely fit to me when I look at Sky Moore. Outside of Sky Moore, I'll say that Jalen Tolbert out of South Alabama, especially around that 51st pick, ton of intrigue to me. This is the guy that I believe in a lot. I think this is the guy that's going to prove people wrong. His underlying numbers are phenomenal. I know we got to question the level of competition, no doubt about it. But even when he played an SEC opponent, I believe he played Tennessee, and he cooked them. He cooked them, man. I think this guy is so underrated. Inside, outside versatility. This guy is such a good route runner on film. I believe in Jalen Tolbert a lot from South Alabama. The other guy I'll say I think, you got to consider is John Mechie III. I think the underlying film shows a very good route runner. I don't know what they're going to think of with the ACL. Maybe teams don't want to take him in the second round, and that might be more of a third round valuation, day 2 still, but maybe third round. But if I'm a team and I got a veteran guy and I just want to get a guy and I want to control his rights for 4 years, and I know that the first year it might take him until the second half of the year to kind of really be who he's going to be in the NFL, I'd probably take a chance on John Mechie. I really like him a lot. I think he's a really good football player. Outside of that, I think the other guy that I think is really rising up boards in terms of round 2 would be Christian Watson, the big young man from North Dakota State. I still think he's more so round 3 guy, but I could see a team saying, you know what, we're picking way back in the third round. We've already had so many receivers come off that this is the guy we want. I think Tolbert and I think Watson are the guys that could tempt you at the end of the second round to make that selection, in my opinion. Both small school guys. Mechie, depends on the injury, depends on what your team doctors say, right? And then I think Olave and I think Sky Moore are just no-brainers. Is there anyone that you have that might rise up? I think I know who you're going to say, and I love his film. This is a guy I'm hoping more so in round 3 is still there. But okay, who's the guy that maybe I didn't put on the list for you in terms of round 2?
Okay. Oh, we'll see if you guessed it right. Khalil Shakir, Boise State. Was that who you were thinking of, or?
I wasn't.
No.
I wasn't. Okay. That's not who I thought you were going to go with. I could see it. I like him a lot. Okay. I mean, depending on where teams grade him, explosive, very explosive.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. I believe he had PFF had him as like the third high, it was third highest of like 50% of targets versus man coverage. So I think he was right up there with London around there. So
You know who I thought you were going to say?
Sky? Or no, you said Sky.
I said Sky. No, I thought you would say that at this point, there's one guy that if you're going to reach on and it's going to be around 51st and you're going to take him a little high because you know he won't be there later, would be David Bell from Purdue.
Oh,
traditional boundary side receiver.
You said him. Oh,
boundary side receiver, phenomenal route runner. He's so underrated as a route runner, and he cooked some major competition. He absolutely cooked. I mean, Iowa's still having nightmares about him because he cooked Iowa. David Bell did. I thought that's where you were going to, because I know that you're a huge David Bell guy. I know that's like you're kind of your guy from this draft class.
Yes.
I'm more of a Jalen Tolbert guy. I think Jalen Tolbert's the dude that's being slept on, but I'm super high on David Bell, especially because that's just a traditional boundary side that he can play the flanker too. He's not like, he's not a great athlete, but he's still more athletic than people think. But I thought you were definitely going to go David Bell, man, because I know you love David Bell. I know that's your guy.
I think in my mind, I just like assumed you put him in with the other receivers, but you left him out there for me, and I whiffed on that one.
I did.
But
I think the easy fruit to pick was Jahan Dotson. I didn't put, and I got a very important reason why I didn't put Jahan Dotson in the second round, and I didn't put David Bell. And I knew, I was like, yo, I know Hunter's going to come for me about David Bell.
No, I really do love David Bell because one play you'll see him just get off press, win on a slant route. And the next play, he'll get him on a double move and get downfield. Like, I'm not, again, another guy, I don't get the speed that knocks on some of these guys' speed. Like, David Bell and Drake London both have ways they can win downfield with technique and with fundamentals. And I think David Bell does a really good job of it. And yeah, I think, like I said, I think he expanded his route tree a little bit this past year. That's at least what I saw from his 2020 film to his 2021 film. I really like that about him. Yeah, he's a playmaker. Like, and Purdue, obviously, they've had guys come out of there. Rondell was a completely different receiver, but he was a big playmaker they had. And you just look at, I mean, there's a couple games where David Bell, you look at the acrobatic catches that guy makes. It's unbelievable, the body control he has to go up and sometimes still land on his feet and have light feet and be able to still get downfield for some yards after catch. So, Yak isn't necessarily, I don't think it's necessarily his calling card as an ex receiver, but he can do it a little bit. So, yeah, I'm a big David Bell guy. I like Khalil Shakir. I think he could rise up. And yeah, I wouldn't add anyone else. I think I would just expand upon Sky Moore. The Elijah Moore comparison, I think, is absolutely there. He feels like the Elijah Moore of this year's draft. And like you said, they played him at the X. They played him in the slot. Like, he can move around, and like I think he'll be more of a slot guy in the NFL, but like over the middle of the field. And he's also a tough guy too. Like, over the middle of the field, not only is he going to get open, he's tough. Like, he has that small school toughness to him, chip on his shoulder. I like him a lot.
He played a lot on the boundary side. I was shocked at how many reps he was taking on the boundary. Like, this kid is tough as nails, Sky Moore. Like, I think LB had a mock draft where PFF still had him available in the fourth round. He was like, what do you think? I'm like, dude, that's the steal of the draft. You get Sky Moore in the fourth round. Let's go party, bro, on Broad Street. Like, that is a heck of a value. Like, no way he's going to fall that far. I didn't even like, I'll tell you the guys I have here. I have two guys in particular that I think second round values, 51st pick. If they're there, I make the selection. I don't think Sky Moore is there. I just don't. I would love to add Sky Moore. I would love what that kid does, but I got some guys that you can get some kind of value with in the third round that are very Sky Moore like. If they're there, I think they're going to come off the board too, to be fair. But the two guys I like are Jalen Tolbert from Southern Alabama, Christian Watson from North Dakota State. Those are two guys at 51 I like a ton that I think might be available in that range of picks. Might be slightly ahead of where teams take them, but because you're picking so far back in the third round, I don't think you have a choice. If you want those guys, that's where you got to take them, in my opinion. Now, I would consider John Mechie the third at this pick. I don't think teams would go this high. I don't, because of the ACL. I don't know how the extent of the ACL. I don't know if it was a full blow. I don't know if it was ACL, MCL, and LCL, or if it was just ACL. I have no clue, guys. I'm not here to try to play doctor, but that would be something I'd look into. But I will say this, in the third round, I have two guys in particular I would love to snag in the third round. That's David Bell, and it's John Mechie the third. If those guys are hanging, like I said, I would consider both of them even in the second round. If they're hanging in the third round, right where I think we're picking 81, I'm calling their name. I am absolutely calling their name. They are very, very good football players. And what I'll say here is who are some other names you would consider, Steve, that may or may not be there. Alec Pierce, very raw route runner, very physically gifted. Definitely probably going to be an X or a tall slot at the next level. Alec Pierce from Cincinnati, love him. A lot of development, though. That's probably not a guy that's going to be, you're going to use him in very specific ways early on. He's got a long way to go as a route runner, in my opinion. Justin Ross, phenomenal freshman season at Clemson in round 3. Guy that probably could play flanker, probably could play boundary side, receiver. I think he's going to have a more prototypical wingspan kind of measurement. I think he'll be above 78 inches, somewhere in that area, 78 or better, maybe close to 80 inches, in my opinion. He's a guy, George Pickens, another guy in the 3rd round, UGA, phenomenal freshman season, very much so a tall slot or a boundary side receiver. Those are the other value picks I'd say in the 3rd round. Outside of that, I don't love it. I mean, Romeo Doubs, can you play? I love him. Vertical threat guy. If you're trying to get that guy in the slot, yeah, sign me up, man. Romeo Doubs, I can see using Romeo Doubs in the slot. Your guy, Khalil Shakir. Slot guy, you want that vertical ability, a guy that could be a flanker too, maybe bounce and move him around the formation a little bit. You could do that with him. I think he makes a ton of sense there. I'll say that a guy that we've heard mentioned a lot recently is Wan'Dale Robinson, who's climbing up boards, explosive slot guy. I definitely think if you want a Sky Moore type, 3rd round, I'd probably go with a player like that, like Wan'Dale Robinson. I think he can give you some utility and some use there. The only player I didn't mention that I had initially circled, the University of Pennsylvania, okay, Penn State. The only reason, and I've been very high on their players, I just did not love him versus man coverage. He got bullied too much for my liking. I think that this is a guy that you have to give free releases to. You have to get him on free releases, and that's Jahan Dotson. He can run routes. He's pretty good if you can get him free, but you got to get him free. And I think that limits him a little too much for my likings in the 2nd round, which is where I think he's going to go. If he's still floating around in the 3rd round, I consider it because I can create offense for him. I know that I can get him a free release, but not in the 2nd round. I think it's too early. Who are your second? Let me go with your 2nd round picks, and then tell me your 3rd round picks. How would you classify this?
Okay, so yeah, I think David. I'm high on David Bell, so I got to put him in my 2nd round conversation. Yeah, Christian Watson I think is definitely there. He's really risen up lately, and again, those small school guys, like once you get a little more film on them, it's a little easier to make an evaluation. So I think that just kind of comes with time. John Mechie, I would probably have him around there. I really do like him, but like you said, the injury is definitely. I probably closer, like later second round, I would say. I would probably. I'm really high on Sky Moore. Like I'd probably put him around that 2nd round conversation. And then as far as 3rd round goes, so I also just to mention I didn't leave out Olave. I'm assuming that he kind of goes like late 1st
Before
round.
we can pick.
So
yeah.
So as far as 3rd round goes, Pickens is probably in there for me. I'm not as high on him. We talked about that a little bit. I think the hype is a little much for him. I need to see him come into the building and do a little more first before I spend anything too high on him. So I have him as a third round guy. Wan'Dale, early 3rd round guy. I really like Wan'Dale a lot. Shakir, I'd probably have around 3rd round as well. Maybe more of a day 3 pick. I think that's more than reasonable. And then as far as the rest goes, I think with Dotson, I agree with you on that. That's a concern, but yeah, there's still ways like kind of the way he just goes up and gets the ball. I think is also really, really rare for like a flanker like him. But I'd probably have him around like middle of round 3. I don't know. I don't think I forgot anyone else. The only guy I might like add there that we really won't talk about very much is Calvin Austin, just because someone could kind of fall in love with his playmaking abilities, kind of like an Anaya Smith, Texas A&M, who ended up returning. Yeah. But obviously the side, like we saw what happened with Adrian Killins. I'm not saying he's Adrian Killins, but like there's a reason 5'9", 162. There's a reason that he's probably going to be more of a day 3 pick.
And we are going to come back, guys, and circle back around for day 3. We're just doing day 1 and day 2 today, and we're going to circle back because day 3's got a really good crop of receivers. We're both pretty excited about who we think might be there available on day 3. All right, let's talk outside areas because we've covered receiver at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Tight ends. I only see one tight end, in my opinion, in the 2nd round and one running back, in my opinion, in the 2nd round. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be the reality of how the draft shakes out. I'm just saying from my perspective of how I've evaluated these players, I've only got two guys that I have that highly considered for that. And number one at running back, I mean, I'll say it right now, as a second round pick, the only guy I have even remotely close to that evaluation, and he would be very close to where the Eagles are picking, is Kenneth Walker, the third from Michigan State. I definitely think that he's a solid second round pick. He may go early third round, but I think he's going to go somewhere in the second round to be right around where the Eagles are picking, in my opinion. I think he's explosive. I definitely think he can run with some contact, but I think the explosion is what teams are going to look at. It's the fact that he can break tackles and he can make plays on his own. And he's a guy that if you're looking running backs, I mean, there's running backs are being a little devalued right now, but I definitely think he's probably a solid day 2, second round pick for me. In terms of the second round, this is a tough one, but the only tight end I have that I think is a second round evaluation, if we're being fair in terms of like, okay, this is where this guy has the likelihood of slipping in and being picked. And I know there are guys that are talented, and this is a very good tight end draft class, but I think Trey McBride is the only guy I think has a shot at going in the second round. I don't think it's a lock for Trey McBride to go in the second round, by the way, because I do think he's a little bit limited as an athlete, but I just think he's a guy he's a high volume catcher at the NFL level. And I think he can block fairly well. Do you have anyone I may have left out of those, running backs and tight ends as you see as like kind of a early day 2 in terms of the second round?
Definitely not running back. I think those guys are probably, I mean, there's the guys you can make an argument for day 3, but not second round, not day 3, round 3, but definitely, I don't think there's anyone else I'd put in the second round. I'm a big Trey McBride fan. I think that, there's some elements of his game that remind me of Goddard. I think he's a sufficient blocker. I think he's going to get better at that. It's something you can teach at the next level. I think that he's a guy, I really envision him kind of getting out into space on a lot of tight end screens. I think his yards after catch, sometimes he kind of got slipped up by first contact, but I think, contact balance will kind of come with time, hopefully. But he ran a variety of routes. Like there were a lot of different things I saw him do, whether it was flood concepts to one side, getting down the seam vertically, just short little drag routes, out routes, even playing as kind of the boundary guy and just, trying to get free on a quick slant, stuff like that I really like out of McBride. So, yeah, not really anyone else at tight end I'm looking at. You might be able to make an argument for Weidermeyer just because of his, explosive playability, but I'd probably still have him around round 3 if I'm being honest. Another guy I like is Cade Otton, but I definitively see him as like, all right, he's probably going to go around where the Eagles pick in round 3.
The only curveball I'll throw in there is someone who might get overdrafted would be like an Isaiah Likely. And that's not because they see him solely as a tight end. That's because they see him more as a Kittle or like a Juszczyk or a piece of an offense where you can use him kind of as an H-back kind of role, tight end, fullback. He's just a weird, versatile piece here. I could see maybe that kind of pick coming through, but that's it. I don't see anybody else I feel that confident saying second round pick. Third round, I'm going to start off with a guy that I think will get overdrafted. And it's not because I don't think he's a good football player, but I think his production this year is a little suspect in my opinion. But someone's going to fall in love with the underlying film on him, and especially going back to last year. I think that they're going to look at that film and they're going to say, you know what, this guy at one point, he was almost a Heisman Trophy candidate. Or he was a candidate. He was almost a Heisman Trophy winner, I should say. Breece Hall, Iowa State. What are your thoughts about Breece Hall?
He's a bulldozer at times. That's not a guy you want to run into. I really think that, like you said, this guy was letting him. It was him and Bijan Robinson, who Bijan Robinson's probably going to be like one of the top guys next year. Breece really put some good film on tape. And I think that there's times where he just kind of gets tripped up. Like I was talking about with McBride, I think there's times where that happens with Breece. And I think he's a little bit one-dimensional in what he can do. But I still think like you know what you're going to get in him. You pick him on around round 3. If he falls to round 4, I'm probably going to take him. I mean, I think that's kind of like, okay, this guy's an electric player, and we can get him in round 4 to kind of contribute, kind of like how Kenny Gainwell fell last year. Different play style, but I think that Breece, he offers that kind of value in that spot right there. So yeah, I think Brees is a really, really good football player. But the hype hasn't exactly met the hype, but I think that's something he could do in the NFL. There's some guys who just kind of turn it on once they get to the next level.
Yeah, and I'll throw a couple more running backs out there that I think have a very good shot. It's not a guarantee, but they got a really good shot at going day 2, round 3. For me, those running backs would be Isaiah Spiller because of the big playability with him. He's very much a one-cut runner, taller guy, big play. Right? People can look at him and say, this guy's got big play potential. I could see that one. Brian Robinson Jr., very well-balanced running back. Gives you a little bit of contact balance, can catch the ball in the backfield, can block okay. He's a fairly decent blocker. I'm not going to say he's nuanced in that part of his game yet. He's a guy I could see going pretty high. Tyler Algier. He's another guy that I think is going to have a shot at going day 2 inside of round 3. Those guys in particular strike me as being kind of the basis of backs you can build around. And I can see them going in the 3rd round in particular, those guys. Now, I'll add 2 more names to the list just because I think that they add a lot of versatility to their game. These are not necessarily 3-down backs, but I just think that teams will value what they could potentially do. And to me, that's Kyren Williams, my bad guys, from Notre Dame, and then Dameon Pierce from Florida. I think those 2 guys in particular I could see going in the 3rd round just because a team might look for 2-minute offense, might look for 3rd-down backs and say these 2 guys might have the potential of being a 3-down back at some point in their career, but I know right away in the 3rd round, these are guys that will contribute to my offense. So I'm not going to sit here and look like I overdrafted them. So I think those 2 guys, along with, like I said, Breece Hall, I would say Tyler Algier, Brian Robinson Jr., those type of guys. I think when you bring them all together, Isaiah Spiller, I think those are your running backs that could be potentially day 2 picks between 2nd and 3rd round evaluation. Is there anyone that you think I may have left out of that conversation?
The only guy I would probably add, I do like Rachaad White from Arizona State. I think when you watch his film, he does kind of look a little bit slow, but he breaks away from defenders. It is the Pac-12, but I think that he's kind of a long strider. I think that something he offers is he can go out in the slot. He can catch out of the backfield if you need him to. I really like his ability in the pass game as well. And yeah, I think he's kind of like a one-cut back. And I'd say anytime anyone kind of dives at him, yeah, he had the one highlight where he hurdled the guy, but most times when I see guys hit his shins, he goes down. So that's kind of what steers me away. But I think he can kind of keep your offense on schedule still. I think he's a guy who will kind of learn that. He's a zone runner. He can do both, but he's definitely more. They ran more zone, I know, at Arizona State. So yeah, I like Rachaad. I think he's a very, very, very good value pick. But I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of falls a little bit the day 4, just with the state of the running back position, as you mentioned.
So I'll talk real quick about some tight end options that I believe could potentially slip into the 3rd round, although I think most of these guys are far more likely to be early day 3 guys, but we'll see how it shakes out. But Isaiah Likely, I think, has a shot. Cade Otton from Washington, I think, has a shot. I'll say that Jeremy Ruckert from Ohio State, depending on how they grade him, probably has a shot at being in that conversation. Jalen Windermeyer, how do you say his name? Texas A&M. Guy that was a lot higher on the year prior than this year. I just butchered that young man's name. I apologize to his parents. But he's got a shot, I think, of being inside of round 3, in my opinion. I could see him kind of sneaking in and getting an opportunity there. And then I'll say that if teams fall in love with Kohler, I still think he's more round 4, round 5 valuation. But I could see him going as high as round 3. Is there any other tight end that you feel like maybe has an outside shot at going that high?
Mm-hmm. I like Maryland's Chigoziem Okonkwo. I think that he's a guy, another guy, kind of undersized. I think he's going to struggle a little bit in the run game, and he wasn't that great of a blocker at Maryland. But I know he had a good East-West Shrine Bowl, I believe. I could see him rising up a little bit. Realistically, I think he's a day 3 pick, but I think, even though he's undersized, the advantage you get with that is obviously he's a pretty good athlete, and he can get out into space and do some nice work. Screenplays, really, really nice on screenplays. I like him in that aspect. And yeah, there was another guy who I was thinking of. Dulcich too. Just kind of, Chip Kelly guy. So I'm sure he'll advocate for him. And I believe Chip compared him to Zach Ertz, which was hilarious because the first play of the season, Dulcich took for a touchdown. He broke like 7 tackles, and everyone's like, that's not Zach Ertz at all. So, I think he's another guy, really good athlete, a guy who you don't really want to face out in space. He made the LSU defense. I know they weren't that great this year, but he made the LSU defense look pitiful that game. So I like Dulcich too, but no, I would agree with you. I think the guys you mentioned are all round 3 picks. Those are just a couple guys who I'm kind of thinking may sneak in there, but I like them on day 3.
Yeah, and I think day 3 is going to be more entertaining when we get to the tight ends and the running backs. I think it's where the majority of these guys are going to fall. But yeah, that's what I got for day 1 and day 2, guys. I mean, just to kind of run back through our list of a name of, just the amount of people we talked about here. So Drake London, to Sky Moore, to Treylon Burks, to Jahan Dotson, to David Bell, to Jalen Tolbert, Jameson Williams, Garrett Wilson, Romeo Doubs, Chris Olave, John Mechie III, Alec Pierce, Justin Ross, George Pickens, Khalil Shakir, Wan'Dale Robinson, Christian Watson, running backs about Kenneth Walker, Tyler Algier. Geez, we talked a lot about running backs. Brian Robinson Jr. Who else did we talk about, guys? We talked about Texas A&M's running back. He's slipping my mind now. Spiller, Isaiah Spiller. We talked about Korean Williams from coming out of Notre Dame. We talked about Florida Pierce from University of Florida. I almost said Florida State there, guys. My bad. So, I mean, we going over a lot of guys. We talked about McBride, tight end. We talked about Likely, Wiedermeyer, Otten, and Rucker. And, I mean, we went over a lot of tight ends, guys, as well towards the end of here. So, I'll ask you this, Hunter. Looking at the Philadelphia Eagles, rounds 1 through 3, what is the likelihood that this team sees what happened over the course of this NFL season and says, we're going to be dominant defense in this draft, but we're taking 1 to 2 offensive skill position players by pick 100 or pick 81 is where we're picking in the 3rd round. What do you think the likelihood is that between picks 15, 16, 19, 51, and 83, or 81, I'm sorry, we see, or maybe it is 83. I don't remember, guys, off the top of my head, but we see 1 to 2 offensive skill position players come off the board.
Yeah, I think it's very likely. Isaiah Likely, just a little pun there. But look, I mean, even a couple years ago when Hurts went off the board, we heard the reports that, and obviously we can't confirm these at all, but there are reports that they were looking at Jeremy Chin, and also J.K. Dobbins. I think they'll consider running backs. Like, that's position you're kind of always looking to add at these days, depending on what happens for free agency, of course. Like Jordan Howard, and bringing back Jordan Howard and Boston Scott could totally deter that. But also Miles Sanders. I mean, he's, there's a good chance he might not be here after next year. So I think it's more likely, like wide receiver, I think there's a good chance we take a wide out on days 1 or 2, just because we talk about those guys. I think there's a lot of guys there who make sense for us. Tight end, I also think is very likely. Like, look, we have, an obvious need for TE2. I'm sorry, I've said it multiple times. Jack Stoll and Tyree Jackson, they're not going to cut it at tight end too. And I think it's important to have that other guy there. Like, I think Stoutland does want to run some more 12 personnel if he can, as the run game coordinator. And also that just gives you a little bit of an extra vertical threat, maybe down the seam, an extra guy to have in play action. You can run some, play action screens off of for whatever you want to do. Maybe Sirianni and the Colts did Reich, a lot of them leaked a lot of their tight ends out on, wide delays and stuff like that. I think having guys like that, you can get out into space and are going to go to work after the catch. That's huge. And I think there's guys who fit that profile, and Trey McBride on round 2. I agree with you on that. And then a couple guys on day 3 who could fit that profile. So wide receiver and tight end, I think are very, very real possibility. Running back, less so, but I also won't be surprised because, you just never know what Howie Roseman's going to do.
All right, guys, we really do appreciate y'all's time and attention. If you guys want to get more content like this, I do have a mailing list that I am building. Inside of that mailing list, I'm offering free things in exchange for your email, such as our free agency guide, in case you're wondering, well, what about free agency? Free agency is right around the corner. Well, I went over free agency linebackers already. I will have safeties coming up. If you're part of that email list, you'll get access to that. I'm sure Hunter wouldn't mind, giving some feedback and some information. He's a part of that list. So, we'll both kind of build that together, and we'll do some stuff like that. In addition to that, guys, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you'll be able to find this podcast right here on the brand new and launched Analytically Incorrect Football Podcast channel. Thank you all so much. We appreciate it. It's been over 45 minutes, guys. I'm going to let Hunter go and probably study for the exams and other things he's got coming up. I know that spring break is right around the corner for him. So
one more week.
I know he's excited and ready to get out of there. So, Hunter, thank you, man. I appreciate you.
Hey, thank you. I also had the shout out North Carolina on my sweatshirt today for you, Coach Steve.
Got the Outer Banks. There we go. All right, guys. Thank you all so much. We appreciate you, and we'll see you guys on Wednesday.